Hi there and welcome to Mastering V-Ray Lesson 5, Part 2. In this lesson I'm going to continue to cover some of the new features in V-Ray 3, including the quick settings box, the color correction tools. I'm also going to demonstrate the new metaball system, and we're just going to take a look at the bloom and glare dialog box and how you can get some cool results using that. As you remember in Part 1, I completely changed the workflow to accommodate the new divide shading subdivs box that unlinked the AA from the scene subdivs, but also I showed you the progressive image sampler, and I had a little bit of doubt as to whether adjusting the scene settings was affecting the quality of the image as opposed to just the simple min shading rate option. Now I've done tests and changing those settings simply don't affect the scene. So just to clarify, if you are using the progressive image sampler, the min shading rate options box is what's going to control the quality in your scene. So if you remember, setting it to 1 gave you more anti-aliasing, and as you go higher, more scene samples start being calculated for every AA sample. So that'll be what you use to control the quality when you're using the progressive image sampler. But to get started, I'm just going to show you the quick settings dialog box. And you'll also remember once again that I said I wasn't going to use it because all it's essentially doing is tweaking these main V-Ray settings and doing it in a way that kind of limits your overall control. So you'll see here we've got everything set up, but if I just load it up and let's just go straight to exterior, you can see it's automatically changed all the settings. You can see here you can also change it to brute force and light cache, which will change that. So as you change the GI quality, it's ramping up the subdivs. You'll notice as you ramp up the GI, the light cache subdivs also go up, and that's something I should probably do more often, go higher on the light cache. But I think the light cache is pretty amazing. It does an awesome job of, calculating those secondary bounces. But basically the reason why I can't use these quick settings is because it's just limiting what you're capable of doing. Now if you remember, the whole point of this course is to master V-Ray, and it's not to limit yourself and try and make things easier just for the sake of saving your brain time figuring things out. So what I mean by that is all these different presets, it doesn't really work on a general basis because every scene is going to be completely different. It doesn't matter if it's a studio setup or a visual effects shot or an interior or an exterior. All you're trying to do is you're trying to balance the samples efficiently. You're trying to put more samples where you need them and less where you don't. That's what's going to give you a quick render, not having kind of some universal settings. So my point is you just need to keep using that min shading rate, you need to keep using the sample rate pass to determine where you need more or less samples. But with that being said, if you are going to use the new quick settings, basically what's going to control your quality is this shading rate option. So as you'll remember, I just said in the progressive image sampler, that's what's being used to control the quality in your scene, and it looks like it's this min shading rate options box has been implemented as a more simple way to control the settings in your scene. So as you go up, more scene samples will be introduced and less AA will be introduced. So kind of like a quality slider, from starting at 1 is you'll have less quality, and as you go up you get more scene quality. So I've just reloaded the scene, and I'm just going to render off where we're at the end of last week. And I'm just going to show you, firstly, the color correction tools that have been in V-Ray the entire time. Now, in all honesty, I didn't start using them until very recently, so I'm sure to a lot of guys it seems pretty obvious, but to me, I've only kind of just started utilizing them. So let me just render off. I'll just pause the render. So we've got the render up. Now the first thing you want to do to be able to load these color tools is it's this first option box down the left here. Now up the top you've got all your basic adjustments that have been in V-Ray for a while. So you've got your exposure, you've got your contrast, adjust all the hue, which is pretty basic. Now I don't really use those so much, but one thing I have been using a lot lately is the color balance tools. Now the reason for that is because when you're working in a print job, a lot of the time you're making very subtle color tweaks to sit something into a background better. And if I make those adjustments in Photoshop, every single time I render out the raw EXR file, I've got to take that into Photoshop, make sure it's got the correct color adjustment reapplied, and sometimes that can become a little bit annoying when you're pumping out lots and lots of renders over a very long time. Some jobs will go for a month and you need that same adjustment on every single render. So that's where it's better just to put it straight into the add those adjustments straight in the V-Ray frame buffer. So you can see if I start adjusting the shadows, I can totally change the look of this. And in print, a lot of the times, the benefits you're seeing from making color adjustments are very subtle. Sometimes less is more. So on a render like this, if I want to get some more shape into the render, I can start making some adjustments to make that happen. So if I go into the shadows and start bringing some more cyan and just start balancing that out with a bit of green, you can go into the midtones and you can also kind of adjust it a little bit more. And you'll notice on a lot of the renders I've got in my folio, there's that kind of subtle tint or grade on the render. So you can see by making that simple change, all of a sudden I've got a lot more shape in the shadows. I've changed the shadow color, but it might not necessarily be a bad thing if the photographer or your art director or whatever wants that kind of tinting. But you can see by making those simple changes, all of a sudden you've got a lot more shape in the render. So that's a good example of how you can use these basic tools to enhance your image a little bit more. But apart from that, what you've got is down the bottom here, we've got some of these new tools where basically all these are is your LUT, your OCIO, and your ICC. They're just color profiles that will change the look of your image based on a grade from another piece of software or using data taken directly from your camera. So what you can do is you can go online and you can find LUT files. It's got a .cube extension on it, and you can load them into the V-Ray frame buffer directly. So I've got a few here that I can load just in my assets collection. These are just taken from different websites, which I'll link you to. Now, part of the problem is that these grades are designed for film footage and not direct raw renders. So what I'm going to do is, because these don't look so good, is I'm going to make a couple myself and provide those in a later lesson. So you'll be able to create those different looks that you see on like film and TV and different print jobs. You know, they've just got that, there's certain grades that look a certain way. So I'm going to do my best to emulate those looks and provide you with a few different color profiles to load. But you can see some of the ones here. Like if I load this in, it's totally changing the look of the frame buffer, and even though it's blowing out, like I was saying, these aren't directly built for 3D renders. So I can load in a bunch of different ones and it's having different effects on the render. Now, even though these don't look that great, I promise you that once I do provide you with the different looks for creating different grades, you'll really see the benefit of that. Now, what I'll do is to show you the importance of that is in Octane Render, they've got quite a few different color profiles that you can load automatically, and that's something that I'm going to try and pitch to Vlado to implement. So let me just get up Octane and I'll show you the benefit of that and kind of show you what I'm aiming to achieve with releasing those grade files. So I've got Octane up and I'm just working on a scene that I've just been preparing for the hard surface course. But basically in Octane, it's just an unbiased real-time render. But the only thing that matters for this is just showing you the benefits of those grades. So you can see here the camera response curves they provide quite a lot of them. And I'll just cycle through them so you can see the benefit of kind of what they do to your image. So as I'm sliding through, you can see it's just changing the color based on information taken directly from these cameras that their names are based on. So I like this one. This is what I've been using for this. But you do get some really far out there ones that look awesome. That's another good one. It gives you that film quality look. And so all of this is completely achievable in V-Ray. You just need the right response curve. So that's my point. That's what I'm going to try and get into the. That's what I'm going to try and provide you guys. And then right down the bottom, you can see that it's simply, that's just your standard no color mapping applied whatsoever. So that's kind of how V-Ray would come out looking. More like this, which is still realistic, but you can see just adding a little bit more tone in the image through these color corrections. It just gives it a little bit more realism. So I'll just go back into V-Ray now. The next thing I want to show you, now that we're back in V-Ray, is the new Metaball system. Now what this does is, it uses a particle source as a base for creating a procedural isometric surface on top of, or a blob mesh surface. So you can see here we've got the blob mesh itself, and you can generate this by going into the Create tab, and in the V-Ray menu, you'll see V-Ray Metaball. So all you do is click that and it creates it for you, and then all you do is you go in and you set the particles that you've got. So if I just hide this other Metaball system we've got here, if I just select the particle and I tick preview, you can see it's generating a preview of what that Metaball surface looks like over the particles. Now you can change the threshold to determine how close you want that to sit to the particles. You've got options for smoothing out little problems. So there's smoothing field bumps. What that will do is when you generate these surfaces procedurally, you can sometimes get little clipped bits of geometry. What this button does is it will attempt to fix that. So you can also change the rate at which it's smoothing it as well. But ultimately what I want to show you is I want to show you how you can use Burcon maps and composite maps to generate detail in this surface. So if I just leave it as is right now and just assign a gray shader to it and render this, you'll see it's generating what ultimately looks like what's happening in the viewport, just a real solid kind of blob of geometry, which isn't that interesting. If you had more interesting particles, it would give you a better looking surface, but this Metaball system really comes to life when you start plugging in some textures. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete this one that I've set up here and just unhide the other one I had. It's just got slightly different settings in it. But also what it has is it's got this field texture which will multiply the surface and give you that procedural detail. So in the viewport here, I've got just a couple of different Burcon maps. So if I drag that into the drag that into the texture slot and re-render, what you'll see happening is it's going to create a three-dimensional surface from this procedural texture. And now it's not just a smooth surface, now you're indenting the surface with all that 3D detail. So if this was a subsurface shader, you're actually creating holes in the middle of the surface. So now you know why this would be really awesome for things like if you're making bread or cheese, things like that. So let me just pause the render and I'll show you when it's rendered a little bit more, and then I'll just run you through a couple of these other procedural maps. So as that's rendering, you'll notice that inside these little crevices, there's just a huge amount of detail, and it's the type of detail you can't generate with a displacement map because it's not it's not a procedural 3D displacement. So I'm just going to cancel this render and render off another procedural map.